Hi, in this video we're going to go through a project that will teach you about partial page updates using Ajax. So this is HTML, CSS, and pure JavaScript with the Jquery library. Now the point of this lesson here is really for a C# class and using web development in C# and ASP.NET. But I want to show you here in just plain JavaScript first how this is going to work. So this is the application that we're going to make in the next bit here. So I have a page that shows a couple of songs, and I choose the Get Songs button, and you should see 5 or so new songs appear. Also here in the console you can see that I have some data that is coming in JSON formatted text, and then it shows up here on the screen. Down here at the bottom I have a form that says add a new item. So if I want to add a new song, and then it should show up in the list here when I choose add song, and it pops in at the bottom. So the important thing to notice here is that this is a partial page update. So we are adding songs here without refreshing the entire page. That's the whole point of what Ajax is all about. So let's go and start the coding. So the first thing you need to do for this application is to have a web server running, and I'm using the MAMP application here. So MAMP stands for Macintosh, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And you can see that the Apache server and the MySQL server are running. So you need to download this, install it. There's both a Macintosh and a Windows version available, and both of them work fine. So if I were to go to my website here, you can see that I've already installed the application, and I see some different sites that I've already built in the past. So the reason why I see all these different things here is because this is what my directory looks like. I have deleted the original website that was installed by default, and I've created a whole bunch of different ones here. So the folder that I'm looking at is the htdocs folder inside the MAMP directory. So that's where you find this. So delete everything that's in there and you will have yourself something similar. Now what we need to do is create our own new folder and put some items in there. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to the htdocs folder, and then I'm going to create a new folder, and let's call this thing Ajax Demo. Okay, so we're ready to start work in Ajax Demo. So if I come over to the web browser and refresh, so now when I click on Ajax Demo, I get an index indicating that there's nothing in this directory. So this is what we're trying to get to. So I'm running on localhost Ajax Demo, and that is my starting point. So the next thing I need is a text editor. So you can use Notepad, you can use Notepad++. I'm using Code, Visual Studio Code, and that's just as good as any. Atom is a good one, Sublime Text, so some kind of a text editor. And I'm going to open up the folder that I have just created. So I'm going to select Open Folder. I'm going to find my htdocs folder. So you can see that my directory is inside Applications, MAMP, and htdocs. So yours might be slightly different if you're on Windows. So you're looking for C, MAMP, htdocs. Ajax Demo is the folder I'm looking for, and I choose Open. And so I now have pretty much nothing to work with. I'm going to start from scratch. So let's get started with a test application. I'm going to create a new file in the directory called Ajax Demo. Let's name this file index.html. As you know, HTML is the default thing for a web browser, and index is the default name. So I'm going to create the standard hello world. I'm going to put in a doc type HTML, tell it they have an HTML area, a body, and then an h1 tag, and then put some kind of a message in here. It really doesn't matter what kind of HTML code you use here, just something to display. So hello world is what I'm trying to do. Then I refresh the browser, and sure enough, hello world is what I get. So now I'm going to create a PHP file, and it's going to be called getsongs.php. And PHP has to start with this question mark PHP segment and then a question mark end bracket. In between, I'm going to create some new objects here. So song 1 is going to be an array, an associative array. So each item in the associative array has a string with an arrow and then another item. So string for this guy is ID is 1. The artist I'm going to set as ABBA. And the title for this song is Dancing Queen. And so I'm just going to copy and paste this thing, like up to 5 songs. And then for each song, I'm going to just rename the variable for like song 2 through 5. And then for the ID number, I'm also going to number that from 1 through 5. And then for each of the songs, I'll come up with a new name. So you can invent the songs here of your favorites. So I'm going to choose Queen and Bohemian Rhapsody, Elvis with Hound Dog, Frank Sinatra with Fly Me to the Moon, and the Beatles with, let's say, Hey Jude. So when you're done here, you should have a list of 5 songs, and each of those is an associative array. Next, I'm going to create a variable called ArrayList. And so ArrayList is simply an array of each of these associative objects. So song 1 through song 5 are now in an array. So now the last job is just to print the array. So let's first of all set the type of data that the browser is expecting to be JSON data. So this string here is content-type: application/JSON. Then after that, we can echo out, which is like the print statement. Echo JSON encode is a special PHP function here that will change this into a JSON string. And then let's list the array list. So this right here should produce a small segment of JSON code. Let's try it out. So over in my browser, I'm going to put a new URL up there. So let's say getsongs.php. And you can see that the list of songs that I created now is encoded as JSON. And if your browser doesn't look quite as good as mine, it's because you probably don't have the right plugins. So one of these plugins in my Chrome browser is for printing JSON. So let's do extensions. And sure enough, I have something called JSON Viewer. So go look in your Chrome extensions or Firefox extensions, and you'll find JSON Viewers or JSON Pretty Print or something along those lines. And then you can display your data just like I did. So since that Chrome browser plugin is in there, I can collapse and expand each of these items and see the details. So this is a JSON object. Obviously, it starts as a square bracket. That means it's an array, a JSON array. And when an item starts with a curly, that's a JSON object. So in this case, we have 5 JSON objects inside a JSON array. So next I'm going to create a new file called putsong.php. And this is a PHP file, so let's begin and end with the PHP tags. Now I'm going to borrow some of the code from the previous script here. And I want the header and the echo statement. So instead of echoing back an array list, I'm going to echo back whatever the user inputted in the get variable. So this comes from a form, or it can come from the URL. So we just want to echo get. Let's see what kind of behavior we get when this is run. So let's go to the browser. Instead of putting in get songs, let's here put in the next one, which is put song single. And you can see that I am putting back onto the screen just a JSON array. Now if I wanted to put some data in there, I could do that up here. So let's make up 3 variables and put them into the get request at the top. So A equals 1, B equals high, and 2 and C equals 72.2. And I press enter, and you can see that it generates a JSON object straight from whatever I put into the get. So this is very flexible. If I can, instead of A, B, and C, I can say a number, and then B is going to be a greeting, and press enter, and now I get a different JSON object. So pretty simple, but it's going to be effective as far as our example. It's going to simulate what a database operation would look like. So let's put something in that would be more like our music application. So I'm going to put in artists and maybe a title, and so let's do Jackson and Thriller. All right, now it's time to modify the index file. So we're going to turn this into a display of a list of items with a data entry form. So let's change the title. Instead of Hello World, let's change it to Playlist. The first thing I need is a button that's going to fetch all of the songs from the small service we just created. So the button ID is called get-songs from API, and you can name it anything you really like, but just make sure you remember what this name was. And then put a text on the button called get songs. Then we're going to make a list of songs. So we have a UL, which stands for unordered list, and we're going to need an ID for this. So I'm just going to name it songs. You could call it songs list or something similar. Now I'm going to put 2 songs in. So let's put in maybe a song like Rocky Mountain High by John Denver. And then maybe the second song, let's pick something like Stars and Stripes Forever, which is a famous march by John Sousa. So pick a song or 2 or 5 or however many you like to start with. Now the next item below is going to be an entry form. So let's make this a div. So a div tag and give it an ID of something like entry form. And for the title, we're going to say add a song. And we're going to have 2 inputs. So let's make a paragraph so that they all separate into separate lines. And then for the input, we're going to make it a type text, and let's call this thing the ID to be artist. Then for the next item, let's make the input to be for the title. So for each song, we're going to have an artist and a title. And then we need a button at the bottom that says add song, and that's the ID number for it. So let's see how this looks when we run it. So I'm going to save the changes and then go back to the index page on the browser. So let's back up 1 page, or maybe 2. So here we're back to the original. So this was Hello World, and when I push the refresh button, I should get the new item called Playlist. And so this is what we're going for. Make sure that yours looks like this. If there's any problems with the code, you may have a missing bracket or whatever, but we need to see a list and then an entry form. Now, I personally want to add some CSS styling here. This is really optional, but it will look nicer. So I'm going to add a new item in the header called a relative link for a style sheet, and the style sheet name is going to be called site.css. So let's go ahead and create site.css and put some styles in here to make our form look better. So I have a personal preference for a little bit of a margin. I like the Arial or Helvetica fonts family, and then let's make the font a little bit bigger. So that'll all go into the body tag of our CSS. Let's see if that made any changes. I'm going to refresh the page. And so the new page does show a larger font. It has the font Arial family, and it looks a little bit different with a small margin. So for all the buttons on the screen, I'm going to shrink the size of the text to a little bit smaller than normal. So let's do 90%. Let's see what that looks like. So I'm holding the Shift key down and pressing the refresh button, and the CSS seems to take effect. Next, I'm going to style the entry form. So I'm looking at the ID number for the form. It is entry form. So in the style, let's do a # entry form, and I'm going to put a small border around it. So 1 pixel solid and black. And when I refresh the page, you can see that I have a border. So let's make a few other changes. So for the border, I kind of like the rounded corner look, which is called border radius. For the background color, I've got some kind of a light blue that I've picked out, and you can pick any number you like, so you can do green, black, or whatever it is. And then for the padding, let's add a little bit of margin in there, which is the edges, so 10 pixels looks good. And then for the width, let's make the form about half the width of the page. So all these changes here should make an effect. Let's do a shift on the keyboard and a refresh button. And sure enough, we have add a song with a little bit of the changes that I just made. Now the next section I'm going to do is for each element in the list. So I'm going to the # and songs. That's the region where all the songs are played. And then I'm going to style each li element. So that's a space between them. I'm going to copy and paste everything I did from the entry form. So it's pretty much the same thing. The only option that I'm changing is the colors. So instead of the blue color, I'm going to pick something in the reddish or orangish range. And let's see what that does. So now I'm ready to refresh the page. So I save this and I come over to here, push the refresh. If it doesn't take effect, you hold the Shift key and refresh, and there you have the new items. So each li item has a separate rectangle. Now I want to take out those little dots in front of the items for each title. So I'm just going to go to the UL, and for the UL, which is the unordered list item, let's change the list style type to none. So now when I refresh the page, the little dot disappears, and we've got ourselves a pretty much nicely styled form. Like I said, this is optional. If you want to go through and use mine or something similar, up to you. Okay, now we need to put some JavaScript on our page. So go back to the index, and the first thing I'm going to do is add a script tag in the header. And the script tag is going to say the source of my JavaScript file here is called site.js, which is a pretty standard name for a generic website. So I'm next going to have Jquery installed. So Jquery is a JavaScript library that's going to be handy for us with Ajax. So the best way to find this is to go to the jQuery CDN. So CDN stands for Content Delivery Network, and I'm going to Google search it. I choose the jQuery page, and you can see I'm going to pick the most recent version, which is 3. something. Pick the minified, copy the link, paste it into my JavaScript code section at the top of the page. I save it. Now you can see that everything is nicely aligned for me. I have some kind of a plugin that does the actual formatting whenever I save a document. That's why I have separate lines for mine. Yours doesn't have to look exactly like mine, but you want to check it out, it might be. So now I have a reference to 2 different scripts, one that's online at a content delivery network, and then the other one, which is one that I have to create. So let's make the second one here that's called site.js. So I'm going to make a new file in my folder called site.js, and I'm going to do some coding here. So a little bit oddity of jQuery is that you have to make sure that the page is all loaded before you start running scripts. So the first thing I want to run is just a $ parentheses function, which means the first thing that is checked to see is if the document is ready. So a good way to do that is either to put an alert out, or in my case, I'm going to do a console.log and tell the user that something's ready to go now. So let's go back to the web browser, and now I'm going to press the Shift and the refresh button. And over here in the console message area, it says jQuery is running, document is ready, just like I told it to. So this is good. If you see that, that means you've got all of these JavaScript loaded and ready to run. So now it's time to start programming the buttons. So the first button that I want to program is called the Get Songs from API button. So I put in a £, and then the ID number or name of that button inside the parentheses. Then I put a function called click. So this is a click listener. And the function that runs inside of here is whatever code I want it to be. So I'm going to do a console log and tell the message that says you click the button. So this should work. I'm going to double check to make sure that I have this ID number or name correct. So get -songs from API is what I was expecting. Let's just make sure that it's all the same. So that looks a lot like the one I just programmed. So this button is associated with this script. Let's see if it works. So I'm going to press Shift and refresh again. And now when I choose Get Songs, I do have a message over in the console. If I click it more than once, you can see the number climbs accordingly. All right, so the job of this button is to go get some songs, right? So we're going to introduce the Ajax command. And so this is why jQuery comes in, because $.ajax is a function that is built into jQuery. So we need to have a object inside of the parentheses, and then that object has 3 properties at least. So the first thing is, what kind of data are we expecting? So this is JSON data that we're hoping to receive. The URL tells me what server is supposed to provide this to us. So the URL in our case is getsongs.php. And then the next item is a success function. So if the retrieval was successful, then this will run. And so we're going to put in parentheses the data that's supposed to come back. So sometimes people just put in the word data in these parentheses. I'm going to put in the word songs because I know what the data is supposed to look like. And then I'm just going to console log the message that says, hey, this is what you got, and then print it off. So let's see if we get anything when we run this script. So I'm going to go back to the browser and hold the Shift key and refresh again. And let's click the Get Songs. And you can see now over in the console we have an array of 5 elements, and I can expand that, and you can see each one of them is just as we showed earlier. It's a piece of JSON data, and it is brought back to us in this format. So now we can use this to update our web page in a partial manner. All right, so now we have this data. Let's put it on the page. So I'm going to make a for each loop running in this section here, right below after I print the songs. So $.each is a for each command in jQuery. So I'm going to provide it with a list, which is songs. And then we're going to run a function on each one of those items in the list. So the function is going to have 2 inputs. It's going to have I as a counter variable, and then song is the actual item of one of each of those 5 songs. So I want to first of all form a string that's going to print correctly on the screen. So I'm going to use an li element, just like I did in the previous example. So a title and an artist are going to go here. And then I'm going to concatenate things together using plus signs. And so song.title is the first item that's going to be concatenated in. And then the other item is song.artist. So if I did all this correctly, I'm going to have a string that forms a new li element that has title, artist, and then the actual data for the title and the artist in between. Finally, then I'm going to take a variable, a song string, this thing that I just created, and append it to the document in the area called songs. So these are all jQuery commands that we're just introducing here. You've likely never seen these before if you're not used to jQuery, and you can look these up and find in the manual how they work. But these are good examples to start with. So I think it's append is append to. Let's check that out. So I looked that up, and sure enough, it was append to. So let's try this again. Refresh the page, choose get songs, and this time you can see the list of songs is now appearing, and I've got 7 total. jQuery also has some cool stuff for animations. So I'm going to chain on a few more events. So after I do the append to, I'm going to put .hide and then fade in. So this should gradually show up on the screen. Let's see if this works. I'm going to refresh the page and try to refresh the songs again. And this time they do fade in. They took about a half a second. You can put in some value, I think. So if you wanted to fade in like over 2 seconds, you'd put in a 2000 there. And this time they do fade in slowly. Okay, there you go. Okay, so that accomplishes the first item, is how to do a partial page update using jQuery and JavaScript, and it gets more songs. So you can see the success here is based on this command, Ajax. It does not refresh the entire page, and it relies on this function here called append or append to allow us to do a partial page update. Now I'm going to now do the form at the bottom where it says add song, and we have something very similar to that. So let's first of all start with some starter code here. I'm going to copy the entire function called get songs from API and paste it. So now we have 2 versions of it, and now I'm going to modify this one here for the add song button. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that I have the right ID associated with this button. So let's go back to the index, copy the ID, and paste it into the script for our new method. So add song.click is really what I'm interested in, not the other button. This is now for the form below. So the first thing I'm going to add after the button click is the actual value of the input form. So to do that, I'm going to create a new song, and it's a new object. It's a JavaScript object. So the 2 properties of this object are going to be called the title and the artist. Now I'm going to get that title from the data input form. So that is $, and then the parentheses tell me what kind of element I'm looking for, and so it's #title, which is the ID number of that input form. And then I'm going to get the value of it, which is the text. I'll do the same thing for the artist. So now when we're done here, we should have a song object that both contains the title and the artist strings. Now we want to send this off to another location. So the URL that we're sending it to is called, instead of get songs, it's called put song. And what kind of data do we want to put there? So we need to put in a new function. And so this data is going to be the song that we created earlier. Also, we need one more item at the top is to say this is a get function or a get type of request. So we're sending it something with a get. The data is the song that we defined up here. The data type is still the same. The URL is now defined differently. Okay, so instead of adding a whole loop and a list of songs, I'm only expecting one song to come back. So the success function, I'm going to define the return variable as new song. And so for the console log, let's say here's the new song I just received, and let's console log the new song. Then for the song string, instead of having song.title, it is new song.title and new song.artist. Let's console log that and append, and hopefully we got something to work. So check this out, make sure that all the code here looks like yours, and let's see if it runs. Okay, so I'm going to refresh the browser and then go to try to add a new song. Okay, this time when I try Van Halen and Jump, I get exactly what I was expecting. But it looks to me like it is now showing partial page updates. which is exactly what we set out to prove how this works. So the magic all happens here in JavaScript, and we're using the jQuery library to make things happier for us. So we have two functions. One is get songs from the API, which was to fetch everything from a back-end server. And then this one here is to put something, or to use a GET request to add something to the server and then expect a request in response. So this here is a simplified version, you might say. We're not getting into C# yet, but that's the goal here, is for the next lesson that I'm going to show you is to take this into an ASP.NET application and so show you how it works in C#. So an additional note is that this technology that you're looking at here, jQuery, as I mentioned in a previous video, is going out of date. So most people don't use for loops and appends and what you're seeing here. This works, obviously. It works very nicely for a simple page. The more up-to-date and more sophisticated and more capable systems are React and Vue and Angular, and those work maybe in a larger context better. But for a simple app, and especially here with a C# ASP.NET app, jQuery is still the thing that we're using. And so we're going to move on and see how that works next.